The meeting between Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has concluded in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. Although the first speculations about this meeting emerged about a week ago, the official confirmation came only yesterday. Since the meeting has been concluded, but we don't know about the outcomes as yet, but we will be looking to discuss possibilities of these outcomes. It's been reported that the peace agenda and regional connectivity matters would have been discussed. Peace process between Baku and Yerevan is purely bilateral, so the choice of Abu Dhabi is an avenue that has been positively viewed by both sides. The meeting seems to be regarded as the beginning of a process leading to the eventual signing of a peace deal. It's believed that of the key subjects that will be discussed is the opening of communication. To be more specific, the opening of the Zangezur corridor connecting Azerbaijan mainland with its Nakhchivan exclave. And the meeting has taken place against the backdrop of important developments in the region and beyond. Some analysts highlight proactive US involvement. However, the bilateral or direct nature of this negotiation is absolutely acknowledged by everybody. So joining me now in the studio to discuss further is Orkan Amashov. Welcome to the program, Orkan.
Thank you, Dilek. Thank you very much indeed.
So very fresh, the meeting has just been concluded. We've had the news come through. I want to hear your analysis about the meeting, what you think the expected outcomes might be and the significance of the meeting, and also perhaps let's talk about why the venue of Abu Dhabi was chosen.
Yes, indeed. The rumours about this meeting, Dilek, had been vigorously circulating on the grapevine for about a week. I mean, I think that there was an article published by Middle East Eye 1 week ago by Ragib Soylu, who's an eminent journalist and correspondent. We interviewed him on one occasion, I believe, suggesting that the meeting would take place by the end of July in Dubai. That was the original sort of piece of information that we received. There had been no official confirmation until yesterday. Only yesterday around afternoon Baku time we received that confirmation that meeting was going to take place. And of course, naturally, we have to take into account the backdrop. Backdrop is very rich with lots of elements to be taken into account. As you said, meeting is bilateral. So there is a specific logic of the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process. This process has been bilateral since October, November, December of 2023. Mediators are not playing any specific role anymore. And the choice of Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, of course, is conditioned by the fact that United Arab Emirates is not playing the kind of role wherein you would find a vested interest or particular bias towards one of the parties. So it is perceived very positively, as you said in your introduction, by both parties, by Baku and Yerevan. Azerbaijan's relations with United Arab Emirates are absolutely fantastic, and also Armenia enjoys good relations. This is one moment, of course. Number two, as I said, Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process got its own logic. This is bilateral, and there should have been some sort of direct meeting between the leaders. Let's look back at what happened over the past few months. Aliyev and Pashinyan, Azerbaijani president and Armenian prime minister, met in Kazan in Russia last year in October. That was a meeting on the sidelines of a bigger congregation. They met in May, on the 16th of May in Tirana, Albania. That was a meeting on the sidelines of the 6th summit of EPC. But this meeting is qualitatively different one. It's a proper bilateral meeting with delegations. And I've seen the footage, of course, coming from Abu Dhabi, and I spoke to our colleague who is currently in Abu Dhabi, Katie Wilson. On the Azerbaijani side, we saw, naturally, apart from the president himself, Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov, Presidential aide Hikmet Hacıyev, and also, of course, special representative of Ambassador Elchin Amirbayev, and of course, Deputy Prime Minister Shahin Mustafayev, who is actually, together with his Armenian counterpart, Deputy Prime Minister Mikhail Grigoryan, are leading the process of delimitation and demarcation. So on the Armenian side, we had Deputy Prime Minister Mikhail Grigoryan. We saw Armen Grigoryan, who is head of the Security Council of Armenia, and Foreign Minister. These are the three key fundamental figures. The Deputy Prime Ministers, respectively, they are dealing with the delimitation and demarcation. This is a specific track of the peace process. Naturally, foreign ministers and the presidential aide Hikmet Hajiyev and also National Security Council head Armen Grigoryan, they're also dealing with a wide range of matters revolving around the peace agenda. And also we heard that on the Armenian side yesterday, the information was circulating, the piece of information circulating in the Armenian media suggesting there were 20 members of the delegation. So it's a very extensive delegation, and Azerbaijani side also is, Azerbaijan's delegation is also quite extensive. So they met initially with delegation, and then after that extensive meeting, there was one-on-one meeting between President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan. I don't know the exact duration, but it looks like a very, very extensive and comprehensive meeting. As you rightly said, this is not a meeting to sign a peace deal. It's the beginning of the process. It looks like a qualitatively new process. The reason why it's qualitatively new, because peace agreement is in itself ready. As of 13th of March, both sides confirmed the text is ready. They agreed on the last remaining obstacles, last two provisions. And now what is to be discussed? That's going to be the fundamental question. Naturally, the extra treaty obstacles, and also, naturally, as you mentioned in your introduction, connectivity.
Now, you also mentioned delimitation, demarcation. What else do we know about the draft peace deal that was reportedly finalised in March? Is this a final hurdle? Well, you said it's a new beginning. So what are we to expect from this point?
When I said new beginning, it's the nature of the bilateral nature of the process. It has been bilateral, but still now we have proper bilateral one-on-one meetings. Previously, we didn't have this quality. It was always on the sidelines of big congregations. Number two, we have to consider the backdrop. We see very extensive, proactive U.S. involvement, attempts to sort of make sure that the process is intensified. We also realize that this is taking place against a backdrop of important developments. Russia is an important factor here to be taken into account. Azerbaijan's relations with Russia are not really perfect at this stage after what happened in Yekaterinburg. Armenia has got its own challenges, internal challenges. There's a government-church confrontation, and we know that Russia is widely believed to have been supporting one particular gentleman whose surname is Karapetyan, who's currently jailed, a very important figure, tycoon, and some people are talking about a possibility of Vardanyan Project number 2. Therefore, it looks like that in the face of external danger or some sort of elements coming from Russia, and also in the aftermath of Iran-Israel conflict, there is even more need for internal consolidation and for the intensification of the peace process between the two countries.
Okay, so in light of all this, Orkan, how would you describe the atmosphere between Armenia and Azerbaijan right now? Is there genuine political will on both sides for a lasting resolution? I
think that the will is there. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan needs a peace deal. There's going to be a parliamentary election next year in summer. And before that, he needs to show it as a public internal audience and also externally that the peace process is successful. The success of peace treaty is essential for him to be able to consolidate his internal position. Therefore, the will is there. But what matters a great deal at this juncture is to deal with those extra treaty obstacles. Armenia will need to change its. We'll need to have a referendum to remove that reference to that 1990 declaration, which makes a reference to 1989 decision, which cumulatively amounts, all of the things amount to territorial claim towards Azerbaijan. That needs to be fixed. OSCE Minsk Group dissolution. These are doable, fixable moments. They need to be addressed. For that, Nikol Pashinyan needs to consolidate his internal power. As long as the Azerbaijani side is concerned, this entire peace process that we are talking about was initiated by Azerbaijan back in March 2022. We remember the meeting, a late December meeting in Brussels between the leaders. Back then, EU was mediator. Azerbaijan proposed 5 principles back in March. Armenia reacted. That was the beginning. So this draft peace treaty that we're talking about is effectively the initiation of Azerbaijan, to which Armenia agreed.
Okay. Orkan, now we've also got another guest joining us. We've got a guest from Ankara, Mr. Melih Demirtas, a political analyst and former diplomat. Melih, welcome to the program.
Okay. So Mehdi,
Hello.
before,
I'm here. I'm so sorry. Just breaking news, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us at such short notice. Indeed, it's breaking news. It's very significant, especially for us here in Azerbaijan, in Baku, and for the region. Now, we've just been discussing with Orkan Amashov in the studio. The meeting has been concluded, and information will surely start to trickle through. But Orkan just gave us an analysis of how he sees things possibly unfolding in the next few days and weeks. Also, I'd like to ask you the same thing. What's your analysis here? What do you think some of the outcomes might be from the talks between the two leaders?
Thank you, Ms. Tuna, and also Mr. Amashov for inviting me again, because yes, as we maybe talked yesterday with in your valuable program context, we're just expecting such results. I mean, in the deepening relations of Caucasia, South Caucasia, because these two leaders, I mean, Mr. Aliyev and Mr. Pashinyan, maybe have shown a real stable, maybe also in a very equal, maybe respect to diplomacy and to relations between these two countries in South Caucasia. Although maybe the pressure from north, from south, I mean, from every direction, as you know, maybe from the position of Turkey, also there are important pressure on those two countries. I mean, both Azerbaijan and Armenia. We must accept that both Russia, Iran, somehow United States and Israel, and every country has some important calculations, especially in such a very short time in the last 2 years. Please think about all these developments, what is happening now in the Middle East, in Caucasia, of course. I call it always the greater Eurasia, because we cannot really now diminish the relations that very, a small region and small happenings. I mean, this is the Palestinian development, this is Iranian, this is Azerbaijani. No, I think this is like a chains of developments. So, but I think motivation of these two leaders, I think a strong, of course, force of Azerbaijan after a military victorious terms in these last 2-3 years, especially this diplomatic spirit is followed. And we can say that in both bureaucratic level, in both, diplomatic level, Azerbaijan has shown this skill. But I think Mr. Pashinyan has also another different characteristic, especially in Armenian politics. I'm not a very specialized, area expert on Armenia, but still, as far as I can think about this post-Soviet or post-Cold War spirit in this region, we can say that Pashinyan really showed another kind of, character as the politician, because we know that in Armenian politics, still in domestic affairs, there are important, of course, in critical developments is going on, but still he can maybe show this balance of diplomacy with his important neighbor, Azerbaijan. So we will watch as Turkey, of course, we're always supporting that. As you also remember that on many occasions, these two leaders, Mr. Aliyev and Pashinyan, also come together in Turkey in multilateral platforms. And now we are so glad to see them and to find such positive outcomes in Abu Dhabi right now.
Dr. Delimitation, if I may, very, very briefly, how do you define the role of Turkey? Because we know that Prime Minister Pashinyan was in Istanbul I think about 10 days ago, 14 days ago, 2 weeks ago. President Aliyev was in Turkey as well. It has been said that there is a specific role to be played by Ankara, because when there is a peace deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia, naturally Turkish-Armenian normalization will reach its logical conclusion, and Turkey's presence in the South Caucasus will increase, and also presence specifically in Armenia, and that trade will go up. Trade volume currently estimated at around $800 million, but if the borders they are opened, that figure will go up. What I'm trying to establish here, how do you define Turkey's role, and what is Turkey trying to do specifically at this very juncture?
Thank you, Mr. Amashov. These are all important points. We're always talking also on thinking maybe since the end of the Cold War. The sins and the darkish side of history, unfortunately, after the Soviet Union affected, of course, our Azerbaijani brothers so harshly with the attacks of Armenia, of course. But after those times, even in the very critical and conflictual times, Turkey has always supported and always believed that these two important actors. Also, we can maybe include Georgia too. I mean, these three important countries can always show their spirit in seeking and in finding a real diplomatic solution among their very hard history. I mean, hard history is the reality of this region. We must accept that these two important countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, has important, of course, problems, especially in the community level. Still, if you look at this Armenian domestic politics now, very precious is still going on to Mr. Pashinyan. But despite of all this clavages and maybe problematic atmosphere, you can say that Turkey, with the spirit of mediation, actually this is the key word, the mediation. It is not an hegemonic. You can not talk about an hegemonic maybe idea of Turkey, never, because Turkey has always suffered from such hegemonic pressures inside the Middle East, inside the Caucasus. But instead of this hegemonic or maybe a dominant position, we always think about this equal opportunity of all these actors. Even to Iran, despite of many of its problems, I mean, in the regime level, in domestic, in nuclear talks, even to our neighbor Iran, we always, advising humbly or diplomatically that such projects or such alliances can really motivate all the actors inside this region. And now what we are seeing that Turkey, of course, will benefit from such a cooperation. But I think all this maybe Turkic world, think about these new projects, even Tajikistan also still might be the very, very famous word from China to London. Yes, it is a real important project which we are really want to see for many years. Now it can turn into reality, but we hope that still, or maybe Western Pact members or Russia, I think such important actors also must support such process.
Talking about Russia, Dr. Delimitation,
everything is so sensitive.
You mentioned
Please.
Russia. This meeting is taking place. It has been concluded, of course, but generally speaking, this, in a general sense of the word, is taking place against the backdrop of very important developments. Azerbaijani-Russian relations are not as good as they could have been, in particular, of course, after 25th of December, downing of the Azal airplane, and they had recently been escalated after what happened in Yekaterinburg. And I just received information that the head of the Azerbaijani diaspora in Russia was deprived of his citizenship and deported to Azerbaijan. So, I mean, how will Russia react to this? Because this is a bilateral process taking place in Abu Dhabi. There has been some report of proactive US encouragement, and the name of Steve Witkoff was mentioned on a number of occasions. It looks like that Azerbaijan and Armenia bilaterally are sorting out their own problems, and Russia, and also they are probably going to decide on Zangezur corridor, because potentially, we don't know, we are in the realm of uncertainty at this juncture. We're merely responsibly engaging in the process of producing conjecture, but Russia may lose its control over Zangezur corridor, which was assigned to it by the virtue of the 10 November 2020 declaration. Bearing in mind all of these elements, how will they react, do you think?
It is about what you, of course, talking about these balances of maybe this 20th century, the end of the 19th century, until today, we always seeing these camps. I will call this camps because, unfortunately, sometimes one camp made important imbalances, important dangerous moves to world stability, and sometimes the other side, repeated such harmful acts. But I think in the Russian administration level, right now, I think Mr. Putin and his diplomatic cadre also thinking about such rational developments can benefit them somehow. Of course, we are very sorry to hear such critical news from Azerbaijani and Russia line. The diplomatic relations really exacerbated. And really, as Turkey, we want to show these countries, they are important countries, of course, Eurasian level of diplomacy. And we hope that in a very near future, you will exceed this problem. Of course, yes, there are important reasons from the side of Russia. Also, Azerbaijan has some legitimate reasons to retaliate about this situation. But still, United States is not a real Eurasian actor. We must think about first that United States, yes, it's a number one rule, maybe the number one rule maker, in the diplomacy, in the world diplomacy right now. But we have suffered. I think in many cases that in such outside actors could affect, I mean, the balances of our cultures, the balances of our communities, even the balances of our diplomatic, corridors. So, as the real actors of these Eurasian lines, I think we need, first of all, Russia and even China, because China and its projects, think about these projects which can really extend to the line of Azerbaijan, Turkey, also to Europe. Also, we must listen what will these actors say, I mean, China and Russia. And yes, United States with soft diplomacy can really contribute these processes. Even think about Abu Dhabi, even think about Qatar. Such countries are, of course, important places which are preferred by American diplomacy right now in this last maybe 10, 15 years. But that doesn't mean that it is this a genuine act of some genuine Eurasian diplomacy. We need such spirits, and we need some Russian representation also on the table, also Chinese one. But for our American alliance, for our, of course, as the NATO country in Turkey, we're always discussing this. We need them as maybe a mediator, on an objective mediator, not a subjective one, because as Azerbaijan, you also so suffered from the subjective, diplomacy of many Western, countries. Think about European countries, think about the United States, and also as Turkey has suffered too much. So I think this Mr. Pashinyan's and Mr. Aliyev's talks can really give some signals to Russia, Iran, also China, that this Eurasian diplomacy can have some very, very fruitful results in very near future.
Thank you, Dr. Demirtas. Dilek, you've got a question?
Sure. Mr. Demirtas, do you see the timing of this meeting as linked in any way to the rising Israel-Iran tensions, which have indirectly strained Iran-Azerbaijan ties?
Many experts thinking this. Many experts thinking this. Iran's, we must accept that it's not about this after Islamic Revolution Iran. No, it's like thousands years of influence area, thousands years of cultural, diplomatic or commercial lines of influence area. And after this Israeli, I can say unilateral or one-sided attacks to Iran and then the counterattacks of Iran to Israeli territory, we can say that, yes, of course, as I said in my first response, this Eurasian line and the Middle Eastern lines cannot be separated easily, as some of our diplomats, I mean, many famous theoreticians made in the Cold War times. Every region has its own lines and borders. No, this Eurasian and Middle Eastern lines now really amalgamated, or they are really come between each other. So I say that you're right. The decrease of Iranian power maybe can first of all stimulate such relations, can take place in a very motivated manner. Also in the Russian territory and the Ukrainian territory, we know that the crisis is still going on. But this also push us to think that diplomacy can give some real important results with the motivation of these leaders. First of all, we need some motivated leaders. First of all, we need some brave leaders. And I think these two leaders, Azerbaijan and Armenia, showed already this braveness.
Dr. Demirtas, I just want to very briefly reflect on this legality of the whole arrangement, about the point of legality, status quo. We had some status quo prior to 2020, before the war. That status quo was based on the fact of occupation. The 20% of Azerbaijan territory was under Armenian occupation, and that was the factual reality of the time. But that status quo, of course, was altered as a result of the war. And then now, in mid-2025, we have a status quo which is based on what happened ultimately in September 2023, when Azerbaijan fully restored its sovereignty over the remainder of the Karabakh region. And now we have a status quo based on legitimacy, legality, and we do have some sort of de facto peace. And many would say that year 2024, last year, was the most peaceful in Azerbaijani-Armenian dynamics, and this year is no different. Is no different to that year, the previous year, in that particular respect. So we have what we may call de facto peace. Do you think, on the basis of your observations and what's happening now in Abu Dhabi, that the factor, the possibility of active military confrontation along the conditional border is now conclusively removed from the realm of the possibility?
In international relations and international politics, what you are, of course, saying is so valuable that it is always discussed so commonly. I mean, first, a war or a conflictual environment, we need see the forces and the balance of the forces on the real, and then we can go to the table and we can make an agreement or truce or ceasefire. Such ideas have been so popular, I mean, since maybe 18th, 19th century in the world politics. But what Armenia and Azerbaijan, I think, did, as you said, that in 2020 and on the field, we can see that they maybe limited all these clavages and military, maybe harsh responses between each other. You must accept that Azerbaijan had really important, of course, victorious terms in militarily, but it's also lost the soldiers, lost some maybe important infrastructure. But in the Armenian sector, it is much more heavy. But still, the decision makers, I think, found this maximum point, I mean, the maximum profit point to stop and to start to these talkings. As you said, that the last year was, because of this, is so fruitful. And I really want to bind and I really want to maybe reference again to the leadership. Because in the leadership sectors, first of all, in the policy making, you must have some unity between your bureaucrats, your decision takers, your intelligence, your military, and everyone must have some one voice and some equal respect to the outcomes. And I think we saw such development in Azerbaijan, because after a point of military operations, and of course loss of maybe civilian lives also, Mr. Aliyev maybe showed this skill to start this diplomacy in one level. But the other side, I think for maybe 30, 40 years, which is so savage, which is so violent, I mean this Armenian side, also could know the point to stop. I mean, the Mr. Pashinyan's government and maybe the domestic factors inside it. But we must accept that the Russian factor and the Iranian factor maybe could help such development and such truths can come into reality. I can say Turkey and the maybe other, maybe Turkic states, we must accept that Israel somehow can also conclude and support these processes. I take Israel, of course, separate from its, I'm so sorry to tell that, to the violent acts in Palestine, in the Middle East. We have two Israels here, and in this Israel sector, which really can support this diplomacy in different regions, we also want such an Israel, but still, this devastating and violent acts cannot accept it. But Mr. Aliyev, I think, can bind all these opponents' points in the skillful diplomacy of Azerbaijan. And as you said, that first war and then make a truce and make a peace comes into reality. I think in a successful manner in this case of South Caucasia. Not in every case we can find such a real durable peace. But I hope that we can have that durable, peaceful atmosphere in our Caucasian brothers and sisters.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up shortly, but one last question, Dr. Demirtas. What would be considered diplomatic success today? What milestones should we be looking for?
May I just say one follow-up question, just effectively just adding one more element. After all of these meetings of this nature, Dr. Demirtas, there's always a joint statement. I mean, I expect this sort of joint statement. What do you expect to see there?
Armenia has still some hesitations. The politics has two phases. First one is domestic, and the other phase, of course, the foreign policy or international political real. Armenia had still, Mr. Pashinyan had, as I said in my first responses, important negative also responses in its inner politics, in its domestic politics. But despite all of this, I think he can really show an attitude of this diplomatic balance. And in this, such a joint statement, of course, we can find some sentences that will show some hesitations from especially the realm of Armenia. But also Mr. Aliyev, I think also Azerbaijan side will always continue to underline especially this legitimate right of this independence of this these territories, of the legitimate territories of Azerbaijan. But I think the idea of maybe commercial spirit, or the idea of this soft diplomacy between the nations and communities, will be much more highlighted in such a statement, because that is what needed in these countries. I mean, especially in Armenia and in Azerbaijani economy also, we can find that not only the natural resources, but all this innovative technologies, all this innovation idea in economics, it can all be can have some reflections on Azerbaijani politics now. So such ideas of soft diplomacy and politics and trade and commerce ideas will maybe highlighted in the statement, but still in Armenian maybe old tragedies and old politics, if we find some negative sentences, I mean, which are not directly negative, but which can have some negative implications, we must be not pessimistic, because we still hope that these two countries and these two leaders really found an important way to talk.
Okay, Dr. Demirtas, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Orkan, thank you so much for joining us on this segment as well. As we told you earlier in the segment, it's very fresh news. The meeting has been concluded in Abu Dhabi between the two leaders, and it's expected that perhaps throughout the day we'll hear from them, from the leaders themselves, possibly a press briefing. Stay tuned to AnewZ, and as the information continues to come through, we will bring it to our screens. Thanks for watching.